I got back home for summer break, and it wasn't just a new house waiting for me, it was a whole new set of rules. Mom had married Jack Reeves a few months earlier, and now everything around us belonged to him. The mansion, the furniture, even her, in a way. Dinner was already set when I walked in. Jack sat across from me, chatting easily with Mom while I picked at my food. Then his eyes landed on me. "How'd your semester go, Lily?" he asked. His voice was steady, calm, but there was an edge to it that made me sit up straighter. "Fine," I said, taking a quick sip of wine to dodge more questions. Mom beamed, oblivious. "Jack's got a surprise for us. We're flying to the Dominican Republic." I froze, the glass halfway back to the table. "When?" "Day after tomorrow," Jack replied, swirling his whiskey like it was no big deal. "Thought it'd be fun to keep it under wraps." I set the glass down harder than I meant to. "A trip. With him. 2 days from now." My stomach twisted, but Mom was already gushing about beaches and sunsets. Jack just watched me, his expression unreadable, like he was sizing me up. I forced a smile and nodded along, but my mind was racing. This wasn't my home anymore, it was his, and I was starting to feel like a guest who'd overstayed. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Mom kept the conversation light, asking about my classes, while Jack leaned back in his chair, chiming in now and then. Every time he spoke, I caught myself listening too hard, trying to figure out what was behind his words. He didn't push, didn't pry, but his presence filled the room in a way I couldn't ignore. After dinner, I offered to clear the plates, anything to get a breather. In the kitchen, I ran the water hot, scrubbing harder than necessary. The clink of glass on glass steadied me. I needed to shake this off. He was just Mom's new husband, nothing more. But when I turned to grab a towel, he was there, leaning against the doorway. "Need a hand?" he asked, holding out a dish I hadn't noticed on the counter. "I've got it," I said, keeping my voice flat. I took the dish, careful not to let our fingers brush. He didn't move. "You sure? You've been quiet tonight." "Just tired," I lied, turning back to the sink. "Long drive home." He nodded, like he bought it, but he stayed there a second longer before heading back to the dining room. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It was nothing. He was just making conversation. Except it didn't feel like nothing. Later, I unpacked in my old room, except it wasn't mine anymore, not really. The walls were the same, but the vibe was off. New curtains, a rug I didn't recognize. His money was everywhere. I dropped my bag on the bed and checked my phone. A text from Mom popped up. "Excited for the trip? Jack's been planning it for weeks." I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through my feeds, trying to distract myself, but my eyes kept darting to the door. It was cracked open, just enough to see the hallway light flicker. I got up and shut it, locking it for good measure. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the handle. No one knocked. No one came. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to change something, and not in a good way. The next morning, I woke up early. Mom was already bustling around, packing. I found her in the living room, surrounded by suitcases. "Jack's taking care of the flights," she said, barely looking up. "You should pack light, beach stuff mostly." "Where is he?" I asked, glancing toward the stairs. "Out getting a few things. He'll be back soon." She smiled, folding a swimsuit. "Isn't this great, Lily? A family trip." "Yeah," I said, grabbing a coffee mug from the counter. "Great." I stepped outside to the porch, needing air. The driveway was empty, his car was still gone. For a moment, it was just me and the quiet. But then I heard the engine. His black SUV rolled up, tires crunching on gravel. He stepped out, sunglasses on, carrying a bag from some store I didn't recognize. He saw me and nodded. "Ready for this?" he called out, heading inside. I didn't answer. I just watched him disappear through the door, the bag swinging in his hand. 2 days. That's all I had to figure out what his deal was, or how to keep my distance. We landed in the Dominican Republic just after noon. The sun was brutal, glaring off the tarmac as a private driver whisked us away from the airport. He drove us straight to a sprawling resort, where a villa with its own pool was already waiting. Mom couldn't stop staring out the window, her excitement spilling over. "This is incredible," she said, pressing her face to the glass as we pulled up. I stayed quiet, hanging back by the car while she darted toward the villa. Jack unloaded a bag from the trunk and walked over to me. He held out a glass of champagne, the bubbles catching the light. Relax, Lily, he said. No one's going to bite you here. His fingers brushed mine as I took the glass. It wasn't an accident, I could tell by the way he paused, just a second too long, before letting go. He smiled like it was nothing and turned to join Mom inside. I stood there, gripping the stem, the cold glass grounding me. Something about him was off, but I couldn't pin it down yet. The villa was all white walls and glass doors, the kind of place that screamed money. I dropped my bag in my room and stepped out to the pool area. Mom was already snapping photos, chattering about the view. Jack leaned against the railing, watching her with a faint smirk. I kept my distance, sipping the champagne, letting the fizz burn my throat. By evening, we were at a restaurant right on the ocean. The waves crashed loud enough to drown out the chatter from other tables. Mom sat between us, going on about the menu while Jack ordered for everyone, steak for him, fish for us. The waiter brought the food fast, and for a while, it was just the clink of forks and Mom's small talk. I excused myself after the main course, needing a break. The bathroom was down a dim hallway, all polished tile and soft lighting. I splashed water on my face, staring at myself in the mirror. My hair was a mess from the humidity, but my eyes looked sharp, wary. I dried my hands and headed back. Jack was waiting outside the entrance when I stepped out. Not inside with Mom, but right there, blocking my way. He wasn't leaning or lounging, just standing, hands in his pockets, looking straight at me. "You're really pretty, Lily," he said, his voice low but clear over the sound of the waves. I stopped short. The words hung there, heavy, like he'd been waiting to say them. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He didn't move closer, didn't push it, just watched me with that same steady gaze. I should have said something, anything, but instead, I brushed past him, my shoulder grazing his arm as I went back to the table. Mom didn't notice a thing when I sat down. She was halfway through a story about some resort activity she wanted to try tomorrow. Jack slid into his seat a moment later, picking up his drink like nothing had happened. I grabbed my water and took a long sip, trying to cool the heat creeping up my neck. He didn't look at me again during dinner, but I could feel him there, across the table, a quiet pressure I couldn't shake. Back at the villa, Mom went straight to bed, exhausted from the flight. I lingered in the living area, flipping through a resort pamphlet I didn't care about. The pool glowed blue outside, reflecting on the ceiling. I heard footsteps and looked up, Jack, heading to the kitchen. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and glanced my way. "Nightcap?" he asked, holding up a second one. "I'm good," I said, keeping my tone flat. He shrugged and walked off toward his room. I waited until his door clicked shut before heading to mine. I locked it behind me, double-checking the handle. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in. I sat on the bed, staring at the wall, replaying his words. "You're really pretty, Lily." It wasn't just a compliment, it was a move. And I couldn't tell if I was mad or curious about what he'd try next. The next morning, Mom left for the spa right after breakfast. She'd been talking about it non-stop, some massage package she couldn't wait to try. I didn't mind. It meant I'd get the villa to myself for a few hours. I grabbed a towel and my lemonade and settled by the pool, the sun already warming the tiles under my feet. For once, it was quiet. No chatter, no plans, just me and the water. I'd barely opened my book when I heard footsteps. Jack came around the corner, sunglasses on, a towel slung over his shoulder. He didn't say anything at first, just dropped into the chair next to mine and stretched out like he owned the place, which, I guess, he did. "What are you drinking?" he asked, nodding at my glass. "Lemonade," I said, keeping my eyes on the page. "Seriously?" His tone had a tease in it, like he'd caught me doing something childish. I shrugged. "It's hot. I like it." He flagged down a waiter from the poolside bar, ordering me a cocktail without asking. "Try this instead," he said when it arrived, pushing the bright orange drink my way. I took it, mostly to avoid an argument, and sipped. It was strong, too strong for 11 a.m., but I didn't say that. We talked for a while. Small stuff, weather, the resort, some dumb story about a guy he knew who'd crashed a jet ski. I nodded along, half listening, letting the conversation drift. Then his hand brushed my wrist. It was quick, like he was reaching for his drink and misjudged the distance. I froze mid-sentence, my grip tightening on the glass. He didn't pull back right away. His fingers lingered, just long enough to make it deliberate, then slid away. "Nice bracelet," he said, like that explained it. I didn't respond. My skin prickled where he'd touched me, but I kept my face blank and took another sip of the cocktail. He leaned back, watching me over the rim of his sunglasses, and I couldn't tell if he was testing me or just bored. The day dragged on. Mom texted that she'd be back late. Spa turned into lunch with some women she'd met. I stayed by the pool until the sun dipped low, then went inside to shower off the chlorine. When I came out, Jack was in the kitchen, flipping through a takeout menu. "Dinner?" he asked, not looking up. "Fine," I said, grabbing a water from the fridge. "But I'm picking." He smirked, but didn't argue. We ordered tacos from a place down the road and ate on the patio, the air cooling off as night settled in. It was fine, normal, even until he suggested hitting the beach. "Let's walk," he said, standing up. "It's too nice out to stay here." I hesitated, but the villa felt too small with just the two of us. "Okay," I said, tossing my plate in the trash. "Let's go." The beach was a short hike from the resort, all sand and shadows by the time we got there. The waves rolled in steady, loud enough to fill the silence. We walked along the shore, my flip-flops kicking up grit. He kept pace beside me, hands in his pockets, until I stopped to shake sand out of my shoe. When I straightened up, he was closer than before, close enough that I could smell the whiskey he'd had with dinner. "People don't always control what they want," he said, his voice cutting through the sound of the water. I turned to face him, my pulse picking up. He was right there, barely a step away, his eyes locked on mine. The air felt heavy, charged, like something was about to snap. "Is that supposed to be an excuse?" I shot back, keeping my tone sharp. He didn't answer. Just smiled, that same half-smirk he'd been wearing all trip, like he knew something I didn't. I held his gaze for a second longer, then turned and started walking again, faster this time. He didn't follow right away. I could hear him behind me, his steps slow and deliberate, letting the gap widen. My hands curled into fists at my sides, but I didn't look back. Not yet. Whatever game he was playing, I wasn't sure I wanted to lose or win. I'd been dodging him since the beach, keeping my distance whenever I could. It wasn't easy. Jack had a way of showing up, slipping into every moment I tried to claim for myself. By the time Mom suggested a boat trip, I knew I couldn't avoid it. She was all smiles, packing a cooler with snacks, while I grabbed a hat and hoped for a crowd to hide in. No such luck, it was just the three of us. The yacht was sleek, cutting through the water like it owned the ocean. Mom stayed up front, snapping photos of the horizon, leaving me stuck at the helm with Jack. He decided I needed a lesson. "Come here," he said, waving me over. "You should know how to steer this thing." I hesitated, but Mom called out, "Go on, Lily. It'll be fun." So I stepped up. He moved behind me, close enough that I could feel his shirt brush my back. His hands covered mine on the wheel, guiding them left, then right. "Like this," he said, his voice low, right by my ear. I nodded, focusing on the wheel, but my pulse kicked up. His grip was firm, not letting go until I pulled away to adjust my hat. He stepped back, leaning against the railing, watching me take over. "Not bad," he said, and I caught the edge of a grin before I turned my eyes to the water. That night, I couldn't sleep. The villa was too quiet, the air too still. I slipped out to the balcony, needing space to think. The moon was bright, lighting up the pool below. I didn't hear him until he spoke. "Couldn't sleep either?" Jack was already there, leaning on the railing, a glass in his hand. I stopped in the doorway, arms crossed. Just needed air. He turned to face me, stepping closer. "It's dangerous, the Lily," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "What is?" I shot back, holding my ground. He didn't answer, just stared at me, his eyes steady, unblinking. Then he brushed past me, heading inside. His shoulder grazed mine as he went, and I heard his door click shut a moment later. I stayed out there, gripping the railing until my knuckles ached, trying to figure out what he'd meant. The next day, Mom dragged us to the beach bar for lunch. She chatted with the bartender while I sipped a soda, keeping Jack in my peripheral. He was quiet, scrolling through his phone, until Mom excused herself to call a friend back home. The second she was gone, he slid his chair closer. "Having fun yet?" he asked, setting his drink down. "It's fine," I said, stirring the ice in my glass. He leaned in, elbows on the table, voice low. "You don't sound convinced." I glanced up, ready to snap back, but he was already too close. His face hovered near mine, close enough that I could see the stubble on his jaw. "If you were older," he started, trailing off. His breath hit my cheek, and for a split second, I thought he'd close the gap. I jerked back, chair scraping the floor. "Don't," I said, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the bar. He straightened up, hands raised like he was backing off, but that smirk was still there. "Just talking," he said, picking up his drink again. I grabbed my soda and walked off, heading for the edge of the deck where the sand started. My face was hot, my hands shaky, but I kept moving until I hit the railing. The ocean stretched out in front of me, endless and indifferent. Mom came back a few minutes later, oblivious. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting her phone down. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just hot." Jack didn't say anything else during lunch, but I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. I stayed quiet, picking up my food, counting down the hours until we leave this place. He'd pushed too far this time, and I wasn't sure if I was more angry or rattled. Either way, I wasn't playing along, not yet. When we got back to the villa, I locked my door and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. His words kept looping in my head, "if you were older." It wasn't a question, it was a line, and he'd crossed it. I just didn't know what he'd do next. Mom left for her excursion early, practically bouncing out the door. She'd booked a day-long tour to some ancient ruins, something about history, and a buffet lunch. I stood on the villa's porch, watching the shuttle pull away, her wave disappearing around the bend. The second she was gone, the place felt too big, too empty. It was just me and Jack now, and the silence pressed in hard. I headed to the kitchen to kill time, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher. The ice clinked against the sides as I drank, trying to focus on anything but the sound of his footsteps. He came in from the patio, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, keys jingling in his hand. "Come with me," he said, tossing the keys onto the counter. "Where?" I asked, setting the glass down. He didn't answer, just picked up the keys again and walked out. I grabbed my bag, hesitating only a second before following. Curiosity, or maybe something stupider, pushed me into the passenger seat of his SUV. We drove off without a word, the resort shrinking in the rearview mirror. The road twisted through dense trees, the ocean flashing between gaps. I kept my hands in my lap, counting the minutes, wondering where he was taking me. We pulled up to a standalone villa on the coast, smaller than ours, isolated. No cars, no neighbors, just sand and water stretching out forever. He got out, nodded for me to follow, and unlocked the door. Inside was sparse, a couch, a table, a couple of chairs, and a wall of windows facing the shore. He went straight to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses, and poured without asking if I wanted any. "Sit," he said, sliding a glass across the table. I took it but stayed standing, sipping the wine. It was dry, bitter, catching in my throat. He sat opposite me, leaning back, his own glass untouched. The quiet stretched too long, and then he broke it. "If we do this," he said, his voice low and even, "there's no going back." I set the glass down harder than I meant to, the sound sharp in the empty room. "Do what?" I asked, though I could feel the answer hanging there, heavy and unavoidable. He stood up, closing the distance between us in 3 steps. His hand came up, fingers brushing my cheek, slow and sure. They slid down to my neck, his thumb resting against my pulse. I didn't pull away, not yet. My eyes locked on his, searching for a bluff, but he didn't blink. He reached for the strap of my dress, tugging it off my shoulder. The fabric slipped down, and his hands followed, peeling it away piece by piece until it pooled at my feet. I stood there, bare, the air cool against my skin. He stepped closer, his shirt brushing my arm, and leaned in. His face was inches from mine, close enough that I could smell the faint whiskey on him from last night. I froze, every muscle locked, waiting for him to make the next move. Then my phone rang. The noise shattered the moment, loud and jarring. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the dress, and lunged for my bag on the table. Jack stayed where he was, hands dropping to his sides, watching me scramble. I yanked the phone out, Mom's name lit up the screen. My thumb hovered over the button before I answered. "Lily, where are you?" she asked, her voice cheerful, cutting through the static. I snatched my wine glass off the table, gripping it like a lifeline. "In the room," I said, forcing the words out steady. "Just chilling." "Oh, good. This tour's amazing. Wait till you hear about the ruins. I'll be back tonight, okay?" "Yeah, okay," I said, my eyes flicking to Jack. "See you then." I ended the call and shoved the phone back in my bag, my hands shaking now. Jack hadn't moved, but his face was too calm, too still. Something flashed in his eyes, dark and quick, like a warning I couldn't read. I didn't wait to decode it. I pulled my dress back up, grabbed my bag, and bolted for the door. "Lily," he started, stepping forward, but I was already outside. The door slammed shut behind me, and I hit the sandy path running. My sandals sank with every step, but I kept going, the villa fading behind me. I didn't stop until I was halfway down the road, chest heaving, sweat sticking my hair to my neck. I looked back once. He was still inside, a shadow against the window, fists clenched tight. It took an hour to hike back to the resort. I locked myself in my room, showered off the dirt, and changed into fresh clothes. Mom rolled in that evening, all smiles, dumping her bag by the door and launching into a story about her day. Jack showed up not long after, carrying takeout bags, acting like nothing had gone down. "Hungry?" he asked, setting the food on the counter. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice flat. We ate together, tacos again, Mom between us, oblivious as ever. I nodded at her questions, laughed when she did, but my hands stayed balled in my lap. Jack kept it light, asking her about the tour, tossing me a casual glance now and then. We were both pretending, sliding back into normal like pros. Except I couldn't stop seeing it, his hands on me, that look in his eyes. It was still there, tugging at me, daring me to wonder what I'd do if we got that close again.